Here we go. All right. Now, the exciting part of this webinar, the technical notes. Hopefully you won't experience technical difficulties, but if you do, please dial the number that you see on the screen or email to that email address. Obviously, calling is going to be faster and somebody ought to be able to help you out. The presentation is being recorded and will be available on the website where you registered. And I believe Dana put that link in the chat box. So if you open up your chat, you should be able to see that. I think we all know how to Zoom by now, but just in case, please do make sure you are muted. I believe Dana muted everybody, but do make sure that you stay muted throughout the presentation. You may want to not have your video on just to preserve bandwidth. Just make sure that your name as it appears on the computer screen with your image, with your name right here on the screen is the same name that you registered with. KSU TAB will send out participation certifications, and we only can do that if we can verify that you actually participated. For any Q&A, we will handle all that at the end of the presentation, so at the very end of the webinar. So feel free to put your questions in the chat so you don't forget that, but we will, as I said, do all this at the end of the webinar. Okay, here is the speaker lineup. We have Taryn Horn. Taryn is the Brownfields and Voluntary Cleanup Program Coordinator for the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. Then we have Jennifer Morris with EPA Region 7. She is the project manager with the Brownfields redevelopment and reuse branch. And then myself, Sabina Martin, I'm a KSU TAB partner. I'm the point of contact for Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, and I'm the owner and president of Citrus Solutions. So now I believe I'm going to turn it over to Taryn. Yep. Taryn, I'm going to pull your slides up.
All right. My name is Taryn Horn, and I am the Brownfields and Voluntary Cleanup Program Coordinator for the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, or NDEE for short. And speaking of technical difficulties, I am having some, which is why I'm calling in, and I don't have my camera on, unfortunately, so you can't see my face. But moving on, spring is in the air, and it's a great time to not only engage in some spring cleaning in your residences, but also in your communities. So the purpose of this webinar is to share resources with you to help make that happen. Next slide. First, I will start off with what exactly is a brownfield.
Taryn, hang on a sec. It's stuck again.
Okay.
Damn it. Hope nobody heard that. I don't. There it is. Okay. It's behaving again. That is your next slide, right? Or am I just ways?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
All right. So I'm going to start off to describe what exactly is a brownfield. The textbook definition from the Small Business Liability Relief and Brownfields Revitalization Act is, quote, real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. So in short, an ugly property that nobody wants to touch because they think it's contaminated. Common examples of brownfields include old gas station sites, abandoned buildings, vacant lots, or illegal dump sites. Next slide. Does my community have a brownfield? Next slide. Yes, every community has brownfields. There's a common misconception that brownfield is a regulatory term that implies a site has been deemed contaminated by a regulatory authority, but that is not true. Brownfield is a descriptive term for a site. And a brownfield site may not even be contaminated at all. It's just that perception because it looks bad. Generally, it's the community members themselves that determine what their brownfield sites are because they know where the eyesore properties are at and which sites have had a lack of interest from investors and developers. Next slide. It's important to redevelop brownfields because they can have so many negative impacts to your community. Any environmental impacts from contaminated soil, groundwater, and air contamination go unaddressed. This can lead to contaminated soil runoff during rainfall events, which spreads the contamination. Brownfield properties attract illegal dumping, and structures on a brownfield site often contain asbestos and lead-based paint. There are health inequities for people who live near brownfield sites, which can lead to elevated blood lead levels and increased risk of cancer, asthma, and birth defects. Brownfields lead to fewer employment opportunities due to unused space, which decreases the tax base and depresses the local economy. This may lead to greater rates of poverty and decreased property values around the brownfields. And they impact the community well-being overall. They contribute to increased crime and safety issues, decrease the number of acres of green space and recreational areas due to developers opting to develop on local green space instead of taking a risk on a potentially contaminated property. And as the economy decreases and businesses move to more thriving communities, they can lead to limited access to health care and healthy foods. Next slide. All those negative attributes can be reversed and even prevented, though, by investing a little time and money into your brownfield sites, as this EPA study from 2020 shows. The study showed that communities that had significant brownfield redevelopment had a 32 to 57% reduction in vehicle miles traveled, which makes sense if you use brownfield spaces to develop new grocery stores, medical clinics, and other services a community needs. Residents no longer have to travel to neighboring communities. Redeveloping brownfields instead of on green space led to a 47 to 62% reduction in stormwater runoff, which improves the quality of soil and underlying groundwater. And a 2017 study published in the Journal of the Association of Environmental and Resource Economists showed that brownfield redevelopment led to an increase in local tax revenue of $29 to $97 million in 1 year alone. Next slide, please. Now that you are more familiar with brownfields, I want to discuss what the NDEE Brownfields program has to offer. The purpose of the NDEE Brownfields program is to assess brownfield properties and serve as a catalyst to bring them back to productive reuse. Over the next several slides, I'm going to share a number of resources the program offers that helps achieve this goal. Next slide. The first step in any redevelopment project should be to complete a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. Phase 1 ESA is beneficial because it helps identify any recognized environmental conditions associated with a property. The contractor completing the Phase 1 will search all regulatory databases and publicly available documents to identify historical uses of the property and determine if there are any records of spills or releases. And the Phase 1 not only helps identify the historical use of the subject property, but it helps identify any off-site facilities that may impact the environmental integrity of the site. The image on the left is an example of a regulatory database radius map that is part of a Phase 1 report. The green star in the center is the subject property, and the map plots all facilities within 1/4 mile, 1/2 mile, and 1 mile from the property that show up in regulatory database searches. The report then follows with more details about each of the identified facilities. And a Phase 1 can also help identify potential environmental concerns that might not show up in a regulatory database. For example, the Sanborn map image on the right was included in a Phase 1 report we completed for one of our applicants. And for those that aren't familiar with Sanborn maps, these are detailed maps of cities across the U.S. from the 1800s and 1900s. And they were originally created to allow fire insurance companies the ability to assess their total liability in urbanized areas. But today they can provide a wealth of information. This Sanborn map identified the property as being a dry cleaning facility back in the 1930s. And now this is before there were any environmental regulations or reporting requirements were established, so there were no records of it. And as you may be aware, historical dry cleaning facilities are known to release PCE, or perc cleaner, and other chlorinated solvents into underlying soils and groundwater. So if it weren't for completing the Phase 1 ESA, the environmental concern may never have been identified. The average cost of a Phase 1 generally runs about $3,000 to $5,000, but NDEE's Brownfields program can complete Phase 1 ESAs at no cost to eligible applicants. An eligible applicant is any local government, nonprofit, or economic development district. Basically, any public entity with an interest in redevelopment. Next slide. There is also an environmental liability benefit to completing a Phase 1. A big reason why investors and developers are hesitant to purchase and redevelop on a brownfield site is because they don't want to be on the hook for any environmental contamination that may be present. Under the current Superfund law, you could be liable just by virtue of ownership. So even if you weren't responsible for contamination on a property, the moment you purchased it, you became responsible for it. Because a current owner could be liable for contamination, generally people didn't want to purchase or invest in these potentially contaminated properties. And as a result, properties that look like this often sat idle for years. Next slide. To combat this issue, on January 11th, 2002, President Bush signed the Small Business Liability Relief and Brownfields Revitalization Act, which is also known as the Brownfields Amendments, or the Brownfields Bill for short. And this act provides a host of environmental liability relief options, including for bona fide prospective purchasers who are interested in purchasing land that might be contaminated. One of the requirements to qualify for the liability relief is to satisfy all appropriate inquiries. All appropriate inquiries, or AAI, is the process of conducting due diligence to determine prior uses and ownership of a property and to assess conditions that might be indicative of a release of a hazardous substance. When you complete a Phase 1 ESA, you are satisfying that AAI requirement to qualify for the liability protection. And it's also important to note that the Phase 1 must be completed before taking ownership of the site in order to qualify. And they do have a shelf life. If you complete a Phase 1 but wait a year or so to purchase the property, you will need to complete a new Phase 1 in order to qualify for the liability protection. Next slide, please. The NDEE Brownfields program also completes brownfield inventories. So if you have a redevelopment vision or a plan for an entire area, such as a downtown business district, a particular neighborhood or corridor, NDEE can conduct a brownfield inventory of the entire study area prior to any work. The inventory is kind of like a Phase 1, except that it covers an entire area instead of a single property. So our contractors will research all databases and publicly available information on that study area to see if any environmental red flags pop up. So with this information, the community can then prioritize sites and address them individually based on the community's redevelopment plans and goals. And this image, it shows a brownfield inventory we completed for the city of Bellevue for their Old Town Bellevue district. Next slide. NDEE also covers costs to complete Phase 2 ESAs, whereas a Phase 1 involves a lot of desktop research and non-invasive work. Phase 2 involves collecting soil, soil gas, and groundwater samples to determine if there has been a release to the environment. The pictures on the left depict one of our contractors collecting soil samples at a vacant lot in Lincoln. This property was historically owned by Burlington Northern and Santa Fe Railroad. And with this information, we knew to analyze the soil for heavy metals such as arsenic and lead, because these are contaminants commonly associated with railroad activities. Phase 1 is generally completed before completing a Phase 2 because the information provided in the Phase 1 can help guide the sampling plan for the Phase 2. For example, if a Phase 1 reveals that the property used to be a former dry cleaners facility, like the Sanborn map did in one of the previous slides, we would know to collect soil and groundwater samples to analyze for PCE and other chlorinated solvents commonly associated with dry cleaning operations. The picture on the right shows a device known as a SUMA canister that is collecting soil gas to be sent to a laboratory to assess for volatile organic compound analysis for dry cleaning contaminants. Next slide. The NDEE also covers all costs to test building materials for asbestos, lead-based paint, and the presence of mold, both on building materials and the indoor air. For asbestos surveys, we'll collect samples from all accessible building materials and send them to a laboratory for analysis to determine if they contain asbestos. If the vacant structure is going to be renovated instead of demolished, we can also test all paint for lead, lead concentrations in the paint to see if it's lead-based paint. And then we also, with our mold surveys, we would collect a list of all water damage materials containing mold growth, collect tape samples from surfaces containing mold to analyze for specific mold species that may be capable of mycotoxin production. And then we also collect the indoor air to see what the mold spore counts are in the indoor air. Next slide. And this is a new resource we provide. We now offer removal of orphan underground storage tanks at no cost to eligible applicants. To be eligible, the applicant must represent a local government, a nonprofit, or other public organization. They must own the property, and they must not be deemed a liable or viable responsible party for the tank and any associated releases. The program not only covers 100% of the cost of removing the tanks, but it covers all associated expenses such as backfilling the excavation, concrete replacement, and environmental sampling. And if there is evidence of a petroleum release, the site will then be referred to the NDEE petroleum remediation for additional assessment and cleanup. Next slide, please. And then we also do have some cleanup grants. These are cost share grants, unlike all of the other resources where they're 100% covered. But we have an asbestos cleanup grant to help defray costs with asbestos removal. This grant will reimburse 50% of the total cost of asbestos removal and disposal up to $20,000. And then with the asbestos cleanup grant, you would need to get verification from the State Historic Preservation Office that any asbestos removal is not going to impact the historic integrity of any sites. And then depending on available funding each year, we may also assist with soil cleanup or excavation projects. For example, one year we used some extra funding to help clean up a property that historically served as an oil refinery. Remnants of the refinery were observed on the site in the form of 2 sludge pits, which you can see there, and the pits not only pose a risk to the environment, but also a safety concern. So we use Brownfields funding and funding as well from the petroleum remediation section to extract the fluid from the pits and fill them with clean soil. And next slide, please. Coming soon, we will have a lead-based paint cleanup grant and a mold cleanup grant. And next slide, my contact information there. These slides will be online if you want to, so don't think you have to hurry up and write it down. But with that, I will transfer over to Sabina.
All right, let me pull my presentation up and hopefully the button will work. Oh my God, it worked. All good. So I'm going to tell you, like in a whirlwind fashion here, what the K-State Technical Assistance to Brownfields program can do for you, more specifically your brownfield sites that you might want to address. So what's TAB? TAB stands for Technical Assistance to Brownfields. We all love acronyms, right? So we're just going to go with the TAB thing. It's a national program funded by US EPA. So we are a grantee from US EPA. Our service area is every state that you see here in the middle. So everything in purple, you will be able to get assistance from K-State TAB, and of course Nebraska is included as well. In essence, every community and every tribe in the United States has access to a TAB provider and the services that they provide. So we have a slew of services. I'll explain some of those a little bit later. In order to have such a large service area, TAB has a lot of partners. I'm one of them. Partners have all different areas of expertise. We have landscape architects, economists. We have like I'm a hydrogeologist by training. There are outreach personnel people. So basically we can cover everything that a community would need to redevelop, revitalize a property. Oh, that works. Okay, I'm going to skip over this because Taryn did a really good job explaining this. The key, just to remind you all, is the potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. The site does not have to be contaminated to be a brownfield site. As a matter of fact, about like 80% of the sites turn out to be not pristinely clean, but clean to a level where no cleanup has to occur. So just keep that in mind. So here are some pictures of brownfield sites. Old gas station, cold beer sign is still up. Dispenser islands are still there. Tanks are probably still in the ground. Yeah, so I mean, absolutely. It's a blighted property, it's a vacant property, it's underutilized, and it has the potential for contamination. This is an old manufacturing site. Again, nobody, just by looking at it, knows what happened there. There is an above ground storage tank there. Without testing, you wouldn't know what's in there. Based on the age of the building, you can be pretty sure they have lead-based paint and asbestos in there. And depending on what they did, there could be a slew of other contaminants potentially present. So always test your sites before you buy. Then we have this lovely structure, an old school. We have lots of vacant, empty schools in the United States because of schools consolidations. They just kind of sit there, but they're lovely buildings, and communities want to do something with it. And sometimes the school district says, hey, community, you know, just give us $1 and here you go. Here is your school site and you can do whatever. Again, before you do that, take a look around, do a phase 1. This is an image of the underbelly of a school, and what you see here is asbestos. And that was present in the form of tiles throughout the entire school. Asbestos abatement can be pretty expensive. So again, always do a phase 1 before you buy. If it's costing $1, it's usually too good to be true. And then we have Main Street. A lot of communities don't think there might be brownfields on Main Street, but we'll just take this building here, take a look at this. 3 stories, upper story. Looks like there are no windows here. They are boarded up here, so open to the elements. So you probably get mold. You might have pigeons going in and out there. So we're talking maybe layers of pigeon guano in there. Age of the building, again, asbestos, lead-based paint. And depending where you are in the country, a lot of times there were heating oil, underground storage tanks associated with these types of buildings. And then again, depending on where you are, some communities heating with coal, and these buildings on Main Street had coal chutes accessible from the front, basically underneath the site. So there could be, and that's all that's needed, stuff there, contaminants. So why would you want to redevelop such a site? And Taryn mentioned this already. A lot of it is like the mitigation of blight, of course. You address public health and safety concerns. A lot of times these buildings are left open, so any kid, any youth who wants to party, vagrants can access it and potentially get exposed to something. But think increase of local taxes, facilitation of job growth, and the use of existing infrastructures. I mean, that's a cost savings as opposed to building somewhere, you know, outside on what we would call like a green field. So lots of reasons to redevelop brownfields. But in order to do that, like with everything good, it takes some time. So don't think you can just snap your fingers and bam, you have a a really good development there. It takes some patience, it takes perseverance sometimes, but you'll get there. And with the programs that we are presenting today, we all will be here to help you through it. So for TAB, our assistance, of course, since we're an EPA grantee, is free. And basically, it's tailored to the specific community needs. So there is no one size fits all approach. We'll talk with you, we'll see what's needed, and then we see what we have available and if and where there is a match. So we can help with the redevelopment planning. We can help, we have environmental, economic development expertise. We are not environmental contractors, so TAB will not perform environmental site assessments or cleanups. It's specifically and only technical assistance. Communities are accepted on a first come, first served basis, but in the 20 plus years that I've been associated with TAB in various roles, we never had to turn a community away. So there's that. I always put the disclaimer in, depending on staff and funding availability, but you ought to be safe. So just, there's no application form or anything, just call or email, and then we can see what we can do. Here's a list of TAB services. It's not inclusive, but it's kind of like, it gives you a pretty good idea, let's put it that way. So we can help you identify your brownfields if you need that, and inventory them. We have an e-tool for that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. We can help you with strategic planning and redevelopment visioning, which is basically public outreach and brainstorming as to what could happen to a site. What does the community want or need to happen here? Economic feasibility analyses, market analyses. We can do specific workshops for you, brownfield related workshops and or webinars. Community outreach, if you need help with that, we can do that. Funding sources, the identification of funding sources, that's usually a big one. I mean, everybody needs money to redevelop brownfields. We review EPA grant applications. I put on here help finding and evaluating environmental consultants, because there are communities that get an EPA grant for assessment or for cleanup, and all of a sudden they realize, we need to hire an environmental consultant to do the work. How do we do that? I mean, they're very knowledgeable to go out for RFPs, requests for proposals for, like, I don't know, sidewalks, sewers, what have you. But retaining an environmental consultant is a little bit different. So we can help with that. We have like templates. We can look through your RFP. We can review, edit, and make suggestions. And we also review, of course, any technical reports that come out of the brownfields redevelopment arena, and a bunch of other assistance. So if you need help, just ask. Chances are we have the expertise to help you out. So here real quickly is the brownfields redevelopment process: planning, investigation, and then the redevelopment. Planning, that encompasses obviously the identification and prioritization of brownfields. Chances are that you have more than one. So which one would you like to address first? It also includes redevelopment goals. And for that, your comp plan, your blight study, your housing studies, all of that probably has some brownfields elements already in there. And then the investigation, that's obviously the phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments that Taryn talked about. And if necessary, the cleanup. So I kind of lumped this into investigations, and then the redevelopment process. So we can help you with all of that via technical assistance and provide guidance throughout the whole process. So for the identification of brownfields, I mean, that's as easy as you taking a pen and paper or your phone or whatever, and you go out and look at sites and say, hey, I think that's a brownfield, this is the address, this is the location, this is what I know about the site. Or you can use TAB's brownfields inventory tool called BIT. It's a mobile app. It's also obviously web-based, and I'll have a slide later on as to what it does. But basically, it's an electronic spreadsheet, just to simplify things, where you could put all the site information you have available in it. You can upload photos and documents and everything, and you can generate reports. It has a lot of capacity and capability. So that is something that you might want to consider when you're dealing with identification of your brownfield. You can share all that data. It's password protected. Only you see it. But if you share, or if you want to share, you can invite others to collaborate with you. So quickly, prioritization of sites, that obviously depends on the community goals. What is to the best of the community? What should this site be, or this corridor be, or what's missing on Main Street? What does the community need? And then you need to also think about what environmental unknowns or barriers are there to redevelopment. I think a lot of communities had potential new businesses coming into town looking for sites, and they looked at one and they said, that looks like it may have some environmental issues. Show me a next one. So there's interest, but there is this barrier there. And then, of course, with the brownfield process programs that Taryn has available, that initial hurdle can be taken, because as soon as you have a phase 1 or a phase 2, even if there's something there, you put a box around things, and that's much, much better than any guesswork. Also, the owner needs to be cooperating. A lot of the brownfield sites are obviously in private hands, so that's an important thing. And the site status. If your site is already enrolled in another state or federal environmental program, and there are actions against your site, it likely will not qualify as a brownfield site. So those are the considerations roughly for site prioritization. So you need to eventually tie it all together, right? You have a vision for your site, your corridor, your downtown, and you know what you want to do there, but then you also need to make plans. How do you get there? So you need to have a strategy. You review your zonings, your codes, your area plans, and you need partners and funding sources. Always realizing, since that takes a little bit, that you may need to make adjustment, revise plans as needed throughout the whole process. So here's what we do. What this is like a hot ticket item by communities. That's what we get asked the most often, really, I would say, is the community visioning, where we bring the community together and brainstorm about the future reuse of a site, corridor, or even their downtown. I mean, we have done that before. So we'll ask the community, identify their stakeholders. We do a flyer, an invitation flyer, and they farm that out to their stakeholders, to the people in the community, to all the venues that they have available, and use all the venues that they have available to get to people. And then we basically have them brainstorm in small groups. They come up with their highest 5 priorities for site reuse. They present it to the entire group, and that's basically all these flip charts that you see here in the back from all the different groups where they had their 5 priorities identified. And then everybody gets 5 stickers here. Color doesn't really matter. We had different colors here, but and these stickers prevent votes, right? So these are the votes of an individual that he or she can distribute as he or she sees fit. So all behind one use, all behind different uses, distributed evenly or not evenly, doesn't really matter. So that's the process that I like to use, because it just gathers the opinions of everybody, and there's a clear process to prioritization here. But there are other things that can be done, like a community survey, and we have done that before too. And then the outcome, what we often do is we work together with landscape architects who put all what's being said, the priorities that emerge from these public meetings, into conceptual drawings. How could the site, the corridor, downtown look like based on these ideas? So here's an example from Beatrice. This was done in cooperation with Kansas State Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional and Community Planning. Everybody who goes through Beatrice has probably seen Dempster site. It's the big, ugly monstrosity here. Didn't change much from this picture, along Highway 77. If you come from the south after you cross the blue, what's this, the Big Blue, I think. It's like within the next block, right to the farmers, right next to the farmers co-op. So this is an old, what is it? A mill manufacturing company, I believe, from the early 1900s. Been sitting there forever, busted windows. It's an eyesore. It's right on the entryway into town. Everybody sees it. So the city wanted to do something with it. And we do these projects with students twice a year. In the fall, we do it with K-State, and in the spring, we do it with South Dakota State students. So it's for the students, it's a class project. The nice thing for the community is that they get multiple ideas as to what could happen to a site. And of course, all the students' demographics, they're usually a lot younger than the stakeholders in the community. So you get some different ideas. And that's kind of the fun part. But this was for the Dempster site. I put the URLs here for the story maps. So if you are interested in looking at that closer, you can access it once everything is posted. And I believe actually the presentations have been posted already on the website. This project was a little bit larger. Dempster was one part of it. Beatrice also had 5 vacant schools that the students addressed based on community input and their downtown. Here is Norfolk. That was done a few years ago, also with a K-State student project. So we looked at the former stockyards and the Tyson site. And there were different scenarios that came out, redevelopment scenarios out of this project. So I picked 3 here. But you can kind of get an idea as to how things are going. Redevelopment planning, this for a small community. This was for Harrington, Kansas. This is how it looked when they asked us to come in and just help them to kind of spruce their downtown up a little bit. And there are a lot of brownfields there too. But this particular image just showed you what you can do with just a few little trees. You know, you have these really wide street that nobody uses anymore here to that extent. So you put the median in here with some plantings. And this building, I think, was their chamber or it was a bank, but it looked kind of drab. And the idea there was to put some window vinyl on there, which is really cheap, and put like a nice image on there, maybe of Harrington, and it already looks a little bit more inviting and better. So we talked a little bit about funding, resource roadmaps. That's another big ask that communities usually have from TAB. This is how it looks like. Basically a bunch of funding opportunities, again, very specific to the project, the amount and the match, like a little description, deadlines, and what is it here? Potential project, key stops, considerations. So you get basically a potential funding package that you can kind of pick over and see what works. We do some soil testing also for future community gardens. If a community wants to make a brownfield site into a community garden, either temporary or permanently, that's in cooperation with our K-State Department of Agronomy. That's fee-based, but it's a very, very small fee, not comparable to commercial labs. Brownfields to Brightfields, that's another service that we offer. It's basically consulting regarding solar energy in terms of suitability, siting, resource identification for implementation. And that's in partnership with the Rocky Mountain Institute. eTools, just very quickly, I already mentioned BIT. Here is the URL, that's the inventory tool. And then we have a grant writing tool. It doesn't write the grant for you, but for the EPA grants, Brownfields grants that come out every fall, you can go here and it helps you write it in terms of what information is needed here. It has helpful links and all this good stuff. Contact information. So this is me here. This is Maggie. She is the TAB director for EPA Region 7 and 8. And our latest addition here is Jacob. He is the assistant TAB director for Region 7. All right, and now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Hi there. I am going to share this. Can you see it?
Yes, all good.
All right. Great. I am excited to join you all today to talk about the EPA Brownfields resources for there we go. So the Brownfields mission. And what is clear about this mission here is that the program is designed to empower you the states, tribes, and communities and stakeholders to work together to assess and safely clean up and sustainably reuse brownfields. The key words here are we're empowering you to work together to do the stuff. We're not doing it. You are. Key thing is the ownership. At the end of the day, we'll come to all of your parties and celebrate and help take credit for all of the work that you're going to do. And we will be happy to bring big checks to you. What big checks, you say? Well, let's talk about that. So the EPA supports brownfields revitalization. I really appreciate Taryn's history lesson that she gave us because she explained the origination of the brownfields law. And you might be familiar with this little footbridge across the Missouri River. It's in Omaha, and it is actually located. Its little origin space there in Omaha is at a brownfield site, a brownfield redevelopment site. In fact, a lot of the Omaha riverfront is part of a showcase community that was part of establishing the efficacy of the brownfields program that underpinned the signing of that law. So that law provided for grants and technical assistance to promote the community-driven planning, training for brownfields jobs and workforce development, and grants that build local capacity to manage brownfields projects and successfully revitalize targeted areas. It provided for that liability protection and establish enhancing state and tribal response programs. Yes, all that stuff that Taryn talked about, we are giving Taryn that funding. Yeah. So let's talk about the grants, the direct grants and technical assistance that we can provide. Now, in addition to those free brownfields assessments that Taryn can do, if Taryn has put together or TAB has brought together an inventory for you, where you have a lot of brownfields in your community, you could come in for a competitive grants and for up to 200 or even recently 500, even as a large community, maybe as a regional planning commission or economic development district could come in as a coalition for up to $1 million recently to do inventory, characterization, and assessments together. And also inside those assessment grants, they could do planning for site cleanup and redevelopment planning. What's important is that you also include at all stages community involvement. And in order to be competitive for those grants, it's important that you have a plan and have involved your community at all phases. Another type of grant that we have are grants that allow for you to do cleanups. After you've done all that work and assessments, or maybe you've had Taryn do some assessment work for you, you've found a cleanup that is going to cost a little more than the targeted or shared grant that Taryn can do for you. So you need to get your hands on some larger dollars. At EPA, we've got competitive cleanup grants. Right now, we have been able to provide cleanup grants at increments of 500,000 up to $2 million for really large cleanup grants. And for at least one more year, we will be able to have those cleanup grants with no cost share. After the bill money runs out, we will return back to a time when we will have 20% cost share for our cleanup grants. And probably back to a $500,000 level for our cleanup grant. So if you've got a big cleanup that you want to get done, now's the time to get that cleanup to the table. So cleanup planning and contain the abatement at one or more sites can be done. So you could do more than a couple sites as part of your cleanup package. One thing I must emphasize for those competitive cleanup grants, you must own the site. So that means, what did Taryn say? You must have had a phase one done. It must be a timely phase one. And you must have done that prior to having that application come in for that cleanup grant. Now, another opportunity for cleanup grants to get done is through our multi-purpose grants. That's the third one here, the third bullet. Cleanup multi-purpose grants allow you to do both cleanup activities and assessment activities and reuse planning. So if you have a cleanup site that you already own, but you know that you have maybe another cleanup site and you have some additional assessment that needs to be done, maybe you don't own that one yet, but you're working on getting it into the box. Those multi-purpose grants can be up to $800,000. So, and right now, those also do not have a cost share. So, this next year will be the best time to come in for a multi-purpose grant. The multi-purpose grants alternate years with the revolving loan fund grant. A revolving loan fund grant is itself not the cleanup. It allows you to establish a revolving loan fund program that then allows you to provide loans and subgrants for cleanups. Once you have a revolving loan fund program established in your community, you can continue to come in for supplemental funding as you spend that grant for up to 15 years. So let me repeat that. You get your first grant with your $1 million, you loan that $1 million out, and then you say, please, EPA, can I have some more? And we say, why, sure you can, because you've done such a good job spending that first $1 million. We will give you a couple million more. And you say, well, thank you very much. And you go back and you loan that out, maybe sub-grant out a little bit of it, as long as you keep a 50-50 split and are loaning at least 50, because the idea is you revolve it. You're loaning back out that revolve, you're revolving back the payments, and you get that for 15 years, and then the 15 years come up and you have to close that. But you guess what? You've shown us what a fabulous manager of a revolving loan fund program you are. We will give you a new RLF program and you don't have to compete for it again. I'm telling you, people, the revolving loan fund program is the program you need to get. Prepare yourself, not this year, but next year. I want you all ready for a revolving loan fund program. All right, that's my soapbox. Okay, job training. Fabulous. Remember, Taryn told you about how some of the impacts on communities that are affected by brownfields affects people, affects unemployment, it affects the community. One of the things that the um, Brownfields law did was it also provided for grants to ensure people who are most affected by brownfields also benefit by the investment in revitalizing those properties. So it included grants for job training. Now, you may not be the person who is the person who does job training, but you are thinking of a person right now, I know you are, who might be the person who you should contact about job training. And if you can think of that person, refer them to my contact or the contact at the end of the slides, and we'll get them hooked up for the next round of job training assessment. Because it supports training to help graduates develop a wider skills to ensure sustainable employment. And these people often graduate with the ability to make wages above 17 to 20,000, not 20,000, $20 an hour. All right. Technical assistance. These next slides are clickable. When you touch them, they will link to the EPA website. Targeted brownfield assessment. Taryn has the ability to do some assessments for you, but maybe there are some assessments like you got some big old site that is too big for her to do, or maybe you've got a site that the state used to own. Maybe it's a state facility or the state was responsible for, and Taryn can't assess it. You can use the targeted brownfield assessments, and our contractors will come out and assess it for you. Touch this slide and it will connect you to the application. This is information about land revitalization technical assistance. Another option that we have are different contractors that will be available to do the kinds of technical assistance that K-State TAB has. As we move into the future, this kind of assistance will also be available to EPA through EPA. I encourage you to touch this slide when you get this in your button. It is also clickable. It will take you to our EPA website where there is a toolkit with, I'm telling you, there is a gob of reading for you to do on this website. Tons of information. Please check this one out. And you've seen this map before that tells you about what K-State can do for you. Please save the date, August 5th through 8th. We are going to Chicago for the Brownfields Conference. We encourage as many people to join us. Chicago's not that far away, and it should be a delight to learn about stuff. Again, I am Jennifer Morris. This is my contact. You can reach any team member at r7_brownfields at epa.gov. That person who you were thinking of who might have a job training interest, you can have them contact us at r7_brownfields at epa.gov. And that we will get them routed to the right person, or you can have them send them to me and we'll get them routed to the right person. All right. And I am done with mine, so I will stop sharing. I know we had
Let's do the questions later. So I'm going to have a couple more closeout slides, Q&A being one of those.
Yeah, I know we had a question from earlier that I wanted to make sure we asked.
Yeah, we're not forgetting anything, I think. All right. So we have one special thing coming up in June of this year, real quick, where we, as in Jennifer, Taryn, and myself, would love to visit your community. If you have a brownfield site, a specific site, or a corridor, or anything really that you want to have some help with and some specific attention as to how to develop a plan of attack, what resources could we all bring to the table to help you out. This is going to happen from between June 2nd and 11th here this year. We are not like your relatives that might come unannounced and want to be fed. So neither one of that. There's a link here and also the QR code. If you click that, you get to, well, I mean, calling it a survey is too much. There are really 2 questions. If you're interested in that, click the link. You will provide your contact information and your preferred date and also time, morning or afternoon, for a visit. And then we can plan out this whole trip that we're going to have in June. And I will put the link into the chat here for this a little bit later, like as in when I get out of this presentation so I can actually see the chat box. So now there were not many questions in the chat box, so we're going to answer those now. When you click this link here on the screen or you do the QR code, please do the eval, give us some feedback for this session. That helps us for future webinars to change anything that you didn't like to make them feel better. And yeah, what's the Q&A? Jennifer, did you want, I'm going to leave this up here.
Yeah. The first question we have is from JB to Taryn. Taryn, does the NDEE have in-house staff to conduct phase 1 ESAs for eligible applicants, or do you contract with external consultants for these assessments?
We have environmental consultants who are contracted with us, so when we get an application for a phase 1, we select one of our consultants to go out and do the work.
Great. The question from Tracy Ghosh asks, Jennifer just told us cleanup grant requires site ownership by the recipient. The multi-purpose grants do not require site ownership, though, correct? One little stitch there. Then it goes on to ask, does the Cultivating Healthy Environments, Environmental Justice, Thriving Community Grant Making Program fall under that, or is that totally separate? I can answer that one first. Totally separate. And the multi-purpose, you have to own at least one site. Am I wrong on that, Sabina?
For the multi-purpose grants?
Multi-purpose, you have to own one. Don't you have to own one?
I believe so. I think the last round that
You
was,
don't have to own all of the sites. Like you can have you have to have a target area, and you can have multiple sites within the target area, but you don't have to own all of the sites that you intend to clean up. And you might not, at the end of the day, wind up cleaning up all of the sites. But here is what I will say, and this is what I say to everyone all of the time. Read the guidelines, because guidelines change all the time. So I could say something today and be wrong in September. So read your guidelines, and it would be good to read the guidelines. In fact, I can look at the guidelines real quick. From not this year, but last year. But I think you have to own one initially. 2020 wouldn't have been 24 review. Are there other questions, Sabina, while I'm looking this up?
on a minute, I don't, sorry, I'm gonna click this and you all can see it. Oh, did you already go over that? The main differences, pros and cons for multi-purpose versus thriving communities?
I said thriving communities was completely different. And
But this is, so what's the difference? What should a community do? Apply for a multi-purpose? I mean, I guess that's what the question is, multi-purpose versus a thriving communities grant.
thriving communities grants are completely different. They're funded separately. They are on a rolling basis. You can do a lot of different things with a thriving communities grant. They're available every 4 months at the moment, and I I work for EPA, and that's about as far as I want to go. I guess I can say that I am not in the EJ program and don't know what the current status is of the Thriving Community Grantmaker program.
If it stays, and from what I've heard, it hasn't been axed yet. The
It
Thriving
hasn't
Community,
been axed in Region 7 yet.
right. So it's much more flexible because this is the only grant program that no, not the, I take that back. Not the only one, but for these types of grants where you can do demolition with as a tier 3. And that is a nice thing to have, because otherwise you only can do demo with CDBG grants or through USDA, but then it's heavily linked to the reuse of the site.
Right, and you can also do construction, and you can
Yeah.
purchase stuff, and
Mhm.
yeah.
I mean,
You also have to finish everything in 2 years,
right.
which you on a multi-purpose grant, you're going to have more time.
Yeah. So from a competitiveness standpoint, I'm not sure. I would assume that a lot of communities will go after the Thriving Communities grants because they are so flexible. But then again, the multi-purpose grants are a hot topic too. So weighing, which one is better. I mean, if I were a community, I would go after both.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at what you can do with multi-purpose and do the multi-purpose stuff with multi-purpose and then get the other stuff with the other things.
Yeah, because I mean, you can do some limited cleanup or you can clean up with the Thriving Communities grants too, is my understanding. So kind of depends what you need, how big your site is. Obviously, you need to have the phase 1 and phase 2s done so you know what you're dealing with. I mean, for the Thriving Communities grants, if you wanted to
Right.
clean up, right?
Right, but with the multi-purpose, the
You
benefit
don't.
of that
Exactly.
is that you would be able to, you could potentially do more than one site. Like if you were
Hmm.
doing a target area, you've got one site that you want
Yeah.
to do, but then you've got an investigation you want to do. Let me tell you from experience, a year, a lot can happen from the day you apply, because it's going to be a year before you actually see the money. For just the way it takes the application to award, right?
Yep.
So you're going to get one site that for sure is your priority to clean up, but maybe there's other sites you plan to assess in that target area. By the time you get your money, your priorities have shifted, and it's okay as long as you're in that target area still. If you are now looking at a different site or you're doing a different assessment, as long as you're still working in that target area, you're allowed to shift and do something different with that multi-purpose, as long as you're within the target area and are still working on the site that you had owned at the beginning as the one that got you in.
Right. Oh yeah, maybe we can just add another plug. We are probably doing a grant writing workshop in Nebraska this year too. Obviously NDEE, like Taryn, Jennifer, and myself again, and it's in Kearney. And Taryn, are you still on the phone?
Yes,
Did you? We were thinking June, right? I mean, just take all this with a grain of salt.
July.
July, right?
Yeah, probably late July.
Yeah. So just kind of keep this in the back of your mind. If this happens and if we have the location and date nailed down, I mean, we certainly will send information out. All right. Any more questions, or is this it? Last chance before we close down.
Okay, we got Frank joined in with, you can also acquire property under tier 2 and 3. He's talking about the thriving communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can acquire property. You certainly can't buy property with multi-purpose.
All right. So hopefully everybody filled out the eval. It's a very short one. It's not like you're gonna get asked 10,000 questions here. It's like what, 3, maybe 2. So it should be fairly quick, but we really appreciate it if you would do that.
Question, land banks. Can land banks utilize the funds? If the land banks are organized as a part of a government, local government, land banks can be a local government, right? So then they would be eligible because local governments would be.
There we go. Gosh, I mean, this is a very, very temperamental button on my laptop today, so I apologize. Anywho, thanks for hanging in there with us. If there are no more questions, this will close us out. If you have questions that didn't or that will occur to you later on, feel free to contact us. I mean, I put our emails here again, and you have the slides. They're already posted, as I said, on the website where you registered. So the slide decks are there, and they all include our contact information. So hopefully it was useful to you to listen today, and we thank you for spending this hour with us. Thanks a lot.